All right, picture this. You're in a busy manufacturing plant and someone makes a tiny little error when they're filling out a log. Or maybe they forget to get that crucial initial on an approval step, or they just slightly deviate from the written procedure and don't even bother to document it.
Hmm.
Now you might be thinking, okay, no big deal, right? It happens. But here's the thing. In manufacturing, especially when we're talking about products that directly impact people's health, these seemingly small slip-ups can actually have huge consequences.
Yeah.
We're talking about entire batches getting rejected, production grinding to a halt, maybe even attracting some unwanted attention from regulatory agencies like the FDA.
Oh, yeah. Definitely not ideal.
So are you with me so far?
Absolutely. I'm all ears.
Good. Because in this deep dive, we are going deep, deep, deep into a concept that underpins everything in manufacturing.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
We're talking about good documentation practices, GDP.
GDP.
Mm.
The bedrock of quality in so many industries. It's definitely more than just paperwork, right?
Oh, absolutely. And that's exactly what we're going to unpack today. Think of this as your crash course, your shortcut to understanding the core principles of GDP in manufacturing. We've sifted through a ton of material to get the good stuff for you. We've looked at the actual FDA regulations, those dense documents like 21 CFR parts 110, 111, and 211.
Right.
We've watched hours of videos from regulatory experts on YouTube, dug into industry best practices outlined in all those guidance documents, and even reviewed some classic books on GMP and regulatory affairs just to make sure we're covering all the bases.
Wow, you've really done your homework. I'm impressed.
Well, we want to make sure you have a crystal clear understanding of why GDP is so much more than just, mindlessly filling out forms.
Absolutely. It's the foundation of a robust quality system.
Exactly. Our mission today is really simple. We're going to break down the essential elements of GDP and show you very clearly why clear, accurate, and traceable documentation is not just some boring bureaucratic requirement. It's absolutely critical.
Yes, it's the DNA of quality.
Exactly. It's your first line of defense against regulatory issues and the key to effectively troubleshooting when things go wrong in your manufacturing process, which, let's be honest, they sometimes do.
They definitely do.
So with all that said, let's just jump right in. Why is this whole thing about clear, accurate, and traceable documentation so incredibly important?
Well, think of it like building a complex machine. You wouldn't just start randomly assembling parts without a blueprint or detailed instructions, right?
Right.
Same thing with manufacturing, especially in industries that are heavily regulated like pharmaceuticals.
Mhm.
Detailed records provide a complete history of how a product was made, tested, and every step that was taken to ensure its quality. This traceability, being able to trace everything back, is absolutely fundamental.
Yeah.
If you can't trace the lineage of a product, every single step, you can't truly guarantee that it's safe and effective.
That makes total sense. It's like that saying we keep hearing over and over again in the GMP world, if it isn't written down, it didn't happen. Kind of a stark statement, but it really drives home the point. If there's no documented evidence that a critical step was taken, as far as regulators are concerned, it never happened. And that can lead to a whole world of trouble, especially if there's an issue later on.
Exactly. And when we say detailed records, we're not talking about some vague description. We're talking about meticulously documenting every single thing that could potentially impact the quality of a product.
Okay, so give me an example. What kind of specifics are we talking about here?
Well, for starters, you need to record the exact raw materials that were used, including their batch or lot numbers.
Okay, so you can trace the ingredients all the way back to their source.
Exactly. That's a requirement spelled out in regulations like 21 CFR Part 111 and even the GMPs for food under 21 CFR Part 110. Then you also need to document the specific settings of the equipment used in the process. Think about things like temperature, pressure, how long the process ran, all those critical process parameters. And, of course, you need to meticulously record the results of all those quality control tests, including the methods used and the acceptance criteria.
Wow, so it's really granular down to the nitty-gritty details.
Yeah, it has to be. And don't forget, you also need to document who performed each step and exactly when they did it.
Right, so you have a complete audit trail.
Precisely.
Now, I was watching the 21 CFR 111 GMP laboratory overview video transcript, and they specifically mentioned the need for, those old school logbooks to track things like equipment calibration and maintenance. Why are those seemingly routine tasks so important to document?
Ah, those logbooks. They might seem mundane, but they're actually super important. They basically prove that all the equipment used to make and test the product was working properly and giving accurate results. Calibration ensures your measurements are spot on, and regular maintenance prevents those unexpected equipment breakdowns that could compromise the quality of the product.
Right.
And the transcript also emphasized something really crucial. You have to document these activities at the time they're performed.
Yeah.
You can't rely on memory or try to reconstruct things later. That just introduces too much risk of errors.
Got it. So it's all about creating a real-time, accurate record of what actually happened. Now, the transcript also mentioned that records should be detailed but concise.
Oh, yeah, that's a good
It's
point.
like a balancing act. You need enough detail but not too much.
Exactly. The goal is to capture all the essential information clearly and unambiguously without getting bogged down in a bunch of unnecessary words. Someone reviewing the record, maybe during an audit, should be able to quickly understand what happened, when it happened, and who was responsible without having to read a novel.
That makes sense. Clarity and conciseness actually help with accuracy because if a record is easy to understand, it's less likely to be misinterpreted.
Absolutely.
Oh, and speaking of how information is recorded, the Chayas Lunch and Learn video transcript had this interesting little tidbit about using blue ink with a slight preference over black ink in clinical research documentation. Is the ink color really that big of a deal?
That's a good question. It might seem like a small detail, but there's actually a good reason for it. In traditional paper-based systems, using blue ink helps prevent counterfeiting. Black ink photocopies can sometimes look very similar to the original, but blue ink makes it more obvious if a document is a copy.
Ah, that makes sense. It's all about ensuring the authenticity of the records.
Right. And while the specific ink color might not be a strict regulatory requirement in every type of manufacturing, the underlying principle is the same. Use permanent ink that won't smudge or fade to maintain the legibility and integrity of those records for as long as you need to keep them.
So it's really about using the right tools and techniques to ensure the records are accurate and reliable over time.
Precisely.
Okay, so we've got these detailed records, everything's documented in real time, but how do we actually ensure that the right people performed the right actions and that everything was properly checked and approved?
That's where sign-offs come in. Those signatures and dates, they're critical for establishing accountability.
Right. So you have a clear record of who did what and when.
Exactly. That's like a fingerprint. They provide undeniable proof of who performed a specific task, who reviewed it, and when those actions took place. This is absolutely essential if you ever need to track back any issues and really understand the exact sequence of events in your manufacturing process.
The GMP 101 video transcript actually talked about this, how different departments involved in manufacturing, sampling, and testing, they all need to sign off on the relevant documents to confirm that their part of the process was completed correctly.
Yeah, it's all about creating a chain of responsibility.
And there was this really interesting example of non-compliance in the how to apply good documentation practices, GDP, in your day-to-day living video transcript. There was a situation where lab records were missing that second person's initials or signature to confirm that the original data had been reviewed for accuracy and completeness.
Oh, that's a big red flag.
Right. Imagine all the errors that could slip through without that second set of eyes.
Absolutely. That missing review is a serious gap in the system. It increases the risk of mistakes going unnoticed, and that can have serious consequences.
And the 21 CFR 111 GMP laboratory overview transcript really drove this point home. They talked about how a robust data review process should have at least 2 levels of review. The analyst who did the work reviews it first, and then a peer or supervisor does an independent review. Right, it's like a double-check system to catch any potential errors. Exactly. It's not just about doing the work and signing off. It's about building in those checks and balances to verify that everything is accurate and complete.
Agreed.
Now, GDP isn't a static thing.
Oh, definitely not.
Processes change, regulations are updated. So how do we make sure that the documentation stays relevant and accurate over time?
That's where the concept of systematic reviews comes into play.
Okay, so tell me more about that. What does that involve?
Good documentation practices require that you regularly review all of your manufacturing records and procedures. This ensures that everything is up to date and reflects your actual current processes. Think about it. If your standard operating procedures, your SOPs, haven't been reviewed and updated to match how things are really done on the production floor, then they're useless.
Right, they become outdated and could even lead to errors.
Exactly. And in the How to Apply Good Documentation Practices GDP video, they specifically mentioned that regulations require written procedures for evaluations that should be conducted at least annually. These evaluations should include a review of all complaints, recalls, and any returned or salvaged drug products.
So it's a periodic checkup on the whole system. Why is that annual review so important?
It's all about continuous improvement. By looking back at past complaints, recalls, and other issues, manufacturers can spot patterns, identify weaknesses in their processes, and figure out if their current documentation and procedures are still effective.
Ah, so it's a proactive approach to preventing problems.
Exactly. It's much better than just reacting to problems as they pop up.
And this idea of looking back and evaluating, it ties in perfectly with the whole concept of quality risk management, doesn't it?
Yes, it does.
We saw this in the GMP 101 video and in the material on quality risk management. It's all about this cycle of proactively identifying, assessing, controlling, communicating, and then regularly reviewing risks to quality.
Right. You have to constantly be thinking ahead, anticipating potential problems, and taking steps to mitigate those risks.
And systematic reviews of your documentation are a big part of that, right?
Absolutely. They're essential for making sure your quality system is robust and adaptable to change. It's all about constantly striving to improve.
Now, we've talked a lot about the importance of accurate and traceable documentation, and all of this ties into a concept that we hear a lot about in regulated industries, data integrity. Can you explain what exactly data integrity means in the context of manufacturing records?
Data integrity basically means that your records are always accurate and reliable. They need to be a true and accurate representation of everything that happened during the manufacturing process. Without data integrity, you can't be confident in the quality of your products or your ability to prove to regulators that you're following the rules.
Okay, that makes sense. So how do all these GDP principles that we've been talking about, how do they contribute to maintaining data integrity?
They're the foundation. Detailed records reduce ambiguity and make sure you're capturing all the important information right when it happens. Sign-offs ensure accountability so you know who's responsible for what. And systematic reviews ensure that the information stays accurate over time, even as things change.
So they all work together to prevent errors, omissions, fraud, basically anything that could compromise the reliability of your data.
Exactly.
Now, the 21 CFR 111 GMP laboratory overview transcript mentioned that regulators are really focused on preventing transcription errors.
Oh yeah, those are a big deal.
I mean, it seems like a small thing, just copying data from one place to another, but why is it so important to get it right?
Because even a tiny transcription error can have major consequences.
Like what?
Well, imagine if someone accidentally writes down the wrong test result. That could lead to a batch of product being released that doesn't meet the quality standards.
Oh, wow, that could be really bad.
Yeah, it could. So you need to have really solid procedures in place to prevent those errors,
Right.
whether it's being super careful during manual processes or implementing electronic systems that have built-in checks.
Right, so technology can actually help reduce the risk of human error.
Absolutely. And speaking of technology, we can't forget about the regulations for electronic records and electronic signatures.
You mean 21 CFR Part 11?
That's the one. It plays a huge role in modern manufacturing, especially with the shift toward digital systems.
So what are some of the key requirements in Part 11 that are designed to ensure data integrity in electronic systems?
Well, one of the big things is security. You need to have systems in place to prevent unauthorized access or modifications to the data. And there needs to be a secure audit trail that tracks all changes and who made them.
So it's like a digital paper trail.
Exactly. And electronic signatures also have to meet specific requirements. They need to be uniquely linked to the records they sign so they can't be copied or falsified. And each signature has to be unique to a specific user, no sharing allowed.
And I bet there's a process to verify the user's identity before they can sign.
Oh, absolutely.
Mhm.
That's a key part of it. All these requirements are designed to make sure that electronic records are just as trustworthy and reliable as paper records.
So whether it's on paper or in a computer, the fundamental principles of accuracy, reliability, and traceability are still the same.
They are the cornerstones of GDP.
Okay, so we've talked a lot about the nitty-gritty details of GDP. Now let's talk about how all of this comes into play during regulatory audits, those inspections by the FDA. How does good documentation help you survive an audit?
Oh, it's crucial. Think of your documentation as the evidence you present to the auditors to prove that you're following all the GMP regulations. If your records are complete, accurate, well-organized, and easy to find, it makes the whole audit process a lot smoother.
The 21 CFR 111 GMP laboratory overview transcript even mentioned that you should have an up-to-date equipment list readily available for the FDA inspectors.
Yeah, it's all about being prepared and showing them that you have a good handle on things.
And the GMP 101 video transcript talked about how good documentation allows manufacturers to proactively demonstrate compliance instead of scrambling to respond to auditor findings.
Right, it's like having all your ducks in a row before they even arrive.
Exactly. And on the flip side, if your documentation is incomplete, inaccurate, or a disorganized mess, it raises red flags for the auditors. They're going to start digging deeper, and that's when you can run into trouble.
Yeah, that's when you might end up with a Form 483 observation letter, which nobody wants.
Definitely not. And the comprehensive analysis document highlighted that a lot of those Form 483 observations are related to problems with the CAPEA system, which, as we've discussed, relies heavily on good documentation.
It all comes full circle.
So good documentation not only helps you make quality products, but it also protects you from regulatory headaches.
Precisely, it's a win-win.
Now, let's shift gears a bit and talk about the big picture. Why is adhering to GDP so absolutely critical? What are the key benefits?
Well, first and foremost, it helps ensure that you're consistently producing high-quality products. Clear and accurate documentation provides the instructions for every step of the manufacturing process, which reduces the risk of human error and ensures consistency between batches.
So it's like a recipe for success.
Exactly. And if you're meticulously following those documented procedures and keeping detailed records, you can be confident that each batch of product meets your quality standards. And that's what the regulations are all about, making sure that manufacturers have systems in place to control all aspects of production that could affect the quality of the final product.
Right. It's all about minimizing risk and ensuring quality. Now, let's be realistic. Even in the most well-run operations, things don't always go perfectly according to plan. You might have deviations from procedures or get unexpected out-of-specification results. So how does good documentation help in those situations?
That's where traceability really shines. When something goes wrong, you need to figure out why, and good documentation gives you the information you need to conduct a thorough investigation.
Okay, so it's like a detective's case file.
Exactly. You can trace back every step of the process, identify potential contributing factors, and get to the root cause of the problem.
And once you know the root cause, you can take steps to fix it and prevent it from happening again.
Right. That's where KP comes in, corrective and preventive actions. And as we've discussed, KPIA is heavily reliant on having good documentation in place.
It's all connected. So good documentation not only helps you prevent problems, but also helps you solve them when they inevitably occur.
Absolutely. It's a key part of any robust quality system.
Now, another critical aspect of GDP is safeguarding the organization against regulatory non-compliance. How does good documentation help manufacturers stay on the right side of the law?
Well, as we've touched on before, good documentation is the best way to demonstrate to regulators that you're following the rules. It's your proof that you're operating in compliance with GMP regulations.
So it's your defense shield against regulatory action.
Exactly. And the GMP 101 video reminded us that regulators have the authority to enforce those regulations. They're there to protect public health.
Right, it's serious business.
Absolutely. So by following good documentation practices, you're building a strong case for your compliance and minimizing the risk of regulatory citations or penalties. And remember those examples of non-compliance in the How to Apply Good Documentation Practices GDP video.
Oh, yeah, the ones where companies got in trouble for not having proper procedures or keeping good records.
Right. Those are real-world examples of how important GDP is. And the comprehensive analysis document highlighted that a lot of FDA observations are related to documentation issues.
So it's clear that good documentation is not just a good idea. It's essential for staying in business.
Exactly. It protects you from both quality and regulatory risks.
And ultimately, all of this boils down to protecting public health.
Right. Absolutely. That's the overarching goal.
If there are deficiencies in manufacturing processes, often due to poor documentation, the consequences can be really serious for patients.
It's true. We've seen tragic cases where contaminated or substandard products have made it to market and harmed people.
And that's what we want to prevent.
Precisely. By adhering to good documentation practices, manufacturers are directly contributing to patient safety. It's about making sure that the medicines and healthcare products that people rely on are safe, effective, and of the highest quality.
So to wrap up our deep dive into good documentation practices, what are the key takeaways you want our listeners to remember?
Remember the 3 C's: clarity, accuracy, and traceability. Those are the cornerstones of good documentation. And to achieve those, you need to have detailed records that are created in real time, robust sign-off procedures to establish accountability, and regular systematic reviews to keep everything up to date.
It's not just about paperwork. It's about building a culture of quality.
Exactly. GDP is a foundational element of any successful and responsible manufacturing operation.
So for all of you listening out there, we hope this deep dive has given you a better understanding of why good documentation practices are so important. It's about more than just checking boxes. It's about ensuring the quality, safety, and efficacy of the products that people depend on.
Absolutely. And as we move further into the digital age, it's crucial to think about how we can apply those same principles of clarity, accuracy, and traceability to electronic systems.
That's a great point. We're seeing more and more electronic records in manufacturing. So how can companies make sure their electronic systems are just as robust and reliable as their paper-based systems?
That's a big question, and it's something that all manufacturers need to be thinking about. What are the potential risks of electronic systems? How can we mitigate those risks and ensure data integrity?
Maybe exploring the specific requirements for electronic records in 21 CFR Part 11 would be a good starting point.
Yeah, that's a great resource. There's a lot of valuable information in there about audit trails, data security, and other important considerations for electronic systems.
Well, that's all the time we have for today, but we hope this deep dive has given you plenty to think about.
And hopefully you'll walk away with a renewed appreciation for the power of good documentation.
Until next time, stay informed and stay compliant.
And stay tuned for more deep dives into the world of GMP.